with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Private Lenders Podcast. Happy holidays to you all. Chris and Jason here as always. And just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, go check out hardmoneymastermind.com. You can create a free account, network with other private and hard money lenders from across the country, do the training videos, everything else. It's good stuff. Check it out, hardmoneymastermind.com. Okay, we're talking about a situation that just happened this week. We took back a property at a foreclosure auction sale that we didn't expect to get back. Here is the scenario and some of the numbers. So we did a $100,000 loan about maybe 18 months ago, something like that, on a property worth, conservatively 200, 220, maybe more like 250. The borrower ended up going into default. It was tenant occupied. They listed it for sale at 265. It was on the market from about June to October, right around there at 265. They didn't drop price. It didn't sell. Maybe something having to do with, we're pretty sure that there's a tenant in there. They ended up taking it off the market. And during this time, we were in the foreclosure process. Our loan payoff is about $150,000 now, with everything included, all the default interest, late fees, legal fees, all that stuff, from 100 to 150. And that's where we're opening bid. So I was talking to our attorney who does our foreclosures, and we took it to auction sale. There were 4 or 5 registered bidders. In Maryland, you have to show proof of payment or proof of that you have the money to do the 10% down payment or deposit on the auction property. So 4 or 5 registered bidders. One said that he was going to bid the minimum because they were told what it was, which we were opening at 150, and it didn't happen for some reason. These bidders didn't bid at 150. Even though it had just recently been listed at 265. And mind you, this is a renovated property in livable or tenant condition. It came back to us. It sold back to us at 150, and we did not expect that.
Yeah, so a few things to add to that, along with something that I think is kind of an interesting concept and phrase. What happens on paper and the way that a deal potentially looks on paper differs than what happens in reality. A lot of things can happen in reality. In this particular case, a tenant moving into the property, potentially, which we weren't aware of. And we'll get to that here in a second of how that might have happened. But, on paper, you might look at a deal and it sounds like a great deal or a home run. But then in reality, stuff changes. And sometimes you can't control it. So, we're big advocates of never going into a deal with like the loan to own scenario of, hey, well, worst case scenario, I'll just take back this property and then I'll own it, and I can do that. Instead, like, write good loans to good borrowers, knowing that even a really, really strong deal might end up still being in default. And again, neither one of us have fears that we're going to lose money on this deal. I'm pretty sure we're going to recapture everything. Obviously, most importantly, principal, but also, a year's worth of default interest and attorney fees and late fees and things like that. And stuff like that happens, the return just increases exponentially. Obviously, rather the borrower just make their payments and you move on and you redeploy the money into the next deal. But things change and things, don't go as expected sometimes, and you have to kind of change and pivot. So here's a few other things related to this project, and some of the reasons why I think the guy ran into problems. So we did a small construction holdback kind of on this deal to begin with, right? So we had some construction funds, and he was doing work. Because I went back and I looked at some of the construction draws as we were doing them, and he did some work. I will say that the work was a little bit shoddy. but our loan exposure was pretty low. Keep in mind, this was a property. This wasn't a purchase. This was a property that he inherited to begin with. So that was one of the reasons. It wasn't like, hey, I bought it for 100, it needs 50 grand in work, or I bought it for 130, it needs 50 grand in work. So we gave him 100 on what we thought was about a $200,000 as is value, or around as is value at that time. So 50% of as is value, and we thought the value ARV was a little bit higher. Didn't need a ton of work to begin with. So we're looking back, and he didn't do the best of job. Like, the kitchen wasn't all that updated. It wasn't as nice as it needed to be. So my guess is what happened. I don't know this for a fact. Oh, and keep in mind, the borrower had over 700 credit. My guess, what happened was he went in there, he did kind of a shoddy renovation on that, mostly because he wasn't a professional investor to begin with, but had some cash and had good credit. He didn't do a great job on it. He probably went to go and sell it. He couldn't sell it. Then he was like, "Oh man, I'm stuck with these hard money payments, even though whatever they were, $1,200 a month, or whatever it was, over $100,000." And then he probably was like, "Maybe I'll put a tenant in there because that'll cover my rent, and then I'll keep this as a rental property." Or right. What? So he put a tenant in there. Eventually, the tenant was probably making payments, and he probably wasn't making payments to us, which, we have assignment of rent clauses that is a different topic that, in essence, you can try to enforce to try to collect rents on behalf of the tenant if the borrower is in default, but that's a different situation. And it kind of got to the point that I want to go sell this thing again. But guess what? Now you don't have a fully beautiful, macked out, renovated house because you have a tenant living in there. So you either have to kick out the tenant and redo some of the work, or you have to sell it as a nice livable house as long as the tenant's taking care of it. So he relisted the property closer to, market value, with a tenant in there. So my guess is that's kind of the challenge that he's had. And we're uncertain if there's still a tenant in the property or not. We think there is. And that's most likely what scared some of the potential bidders at the auction, was that there's a potentially that they might have to evict or do a workout with.
Yeah. So there were a few unexpected things that happened in this scenario. A lot of these happen in other default loan situations, but we exit more cleanly than this. It's rare that we get to an auction sale, and it's very rare that we take a property back. But we're totally okay to handle it. We know investors that will pay the 150-ish and we'll get out fine. But I think also it's an indicator of what's going on in the market. I don't think that we would have taken this property back if this were 6 or 8 months ago. I think it would have sold. I think the auction buyers are more aggressive. Now the market's taken a dip, so they're, pulling back a little bit. And our foreclosure attorney agreed. He said that there is another scenario that he handled this week too that looked like an easy sale, and the lender took that one back too. It wasn't one of ours. Yeah. So he saw 2 in the same week where these would normally sell and they didn't. So tells you a little bit about what's going on in the market, what people are thinking, what people are anticipating for the future, like 6, 12, 24 months down the road. So we wanted to tell you guys about it. I think that's a important thing to be aware of as you're quoting loans and moving into the market that we're going to have in 2023 is we're being careful. You should too. Still do your business. There's a lot of opportunity out there, especially with a lot of the institutional money getting more expensive / going away. There's a lot of opportunity to quote good deals to good people. Conservatively, they're bringing a lot of cash if it's an acquisition, stuff like that. And you still got to be careful. All that being said, you still have to be careful with how it's going to play out.
Yeah, we shared this with our 3 partners that run our other offices as well as a good example. And, you never know kind of what's happening. And like, this isn't a deal that we're losing sleep over. This isn't a deal that we're really scared about. Like, the numbers were good. And I still think the numbers are good, right? Our 2 exit plans are going to be go in there, literally spend a few $1,000s to clean it back up if it needs to be, and probably list it at $199, or just unload it, potentially do a substitute purchaser agreement, and because we're the purchaser of sale back to our company, so we can do a straight substitute purchaser agreement. That's a good point. I don't know if that's common in every state, but that's common here. And in essence, resell the rights to the property to this new buyer who I know will pay for it at our, around what we want. So we have options. We just got to figure out Do we want to unload it as quick as possible and get everything back? Or do we want to be opportunistic, take some more time, a little bit more risk, and potentially sell it for a higher price? And, that's a business decision that, the business owner or you as the operator needs to determine. But again, like, I don't want this to scare anybody, but I think it should be, going back to that phrase that we kind of started with, is what happens on paper is different than what happens in reality, right? Like, it's okay. Like, it's not a big deal if this particular situation happens, but we do want to be cautious on our deals, knowing that stuff could happen, stuff that is out of our controls. And, you want to write good loans to good borrowers that have cash, that have good credit, that hopefully have some experience as well. And cash is king. The more money they bring to the table of their own, the better they will be in. And, it's funny because, like, if this guy bought this property and didn't inherit this property, I bet it wouldn't be in this situation. That's one of the things that we've learned from experience, that inherited properties that need construction, even at low LTVs, typically run into problems, right? Could be because they're less sophisticated. They have less of their own personal funds on the line to lose. So, nobody, it's weird that the guy's walking away from so much equity in this particular thing, when he should have just lowered the price, to $200,000.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, if he had his own cash in that deal, because it was an acquisition and he had $50K or something that he needed to get back, he would have cut that price and sold cheaper.
Yeah. But I will tell you from experience that we've been involved in lots of deals where investors, when I say investors, the real estate investor, the operator, has lost their shirt on deals, but we weren't even phased at all because they had so much cash in the deal and they went over budget. And it's an unfortunate situation. You don't want that to obviously happen. And there's an argument, if you even want to do a deal, that the real estate investor is going to lose money on. But think about it like this. Think about, if a borrower pays $100,000 for a property and it needs they need $60,000 to work, and they bring whatever, $70,000 cash to close. That's kind of like a standard deal that we'll do. Like, we'll do a loan of $160,000 to $200,000, and they'll bring anywhere between $60,000 and $80,000 cash to close, give or take, on a deal. Well, when it's all said and done, like, not only do they have to lose by eating up all the equity in the property, but they're not going to walk away from all that cash that they have. Right? They're not going to walk away from $80,000 in cash. They might walk away from the equity because they're not making any more money. But, like, you don't just walk away from $80,000. They might be like, okay, cool. Well, I'm not going to make money and I'm going to lose money, but I'm only going to lose $40,000. So I'm going to stay in the deal because I want to try to recoup my other $40,000 that I still have in that deal. Yeah. Cash is king. The more cash borrowers put into these deals, the better it is, especially in a market like today.
Absolutely. So hope you guys are seeing good deal flow like we are, still being safe like I was obviously putting out there earlier. Enjoy the holiday season. We will see you guys around hardmoneymastermind.com, and we will also see you on the next episode of the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you'd enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard